The problem is, when trying to talk about reality, there is no agreement on what we are discussing. There is no single, objective, substance we can confirm to be unquestionable real. Inevitably, the discussion devolves down into a debate about different observations. But where is reality? To put this another way, physical reality is as much an illusion or delusion as metaphysical reality. The desk you see before you and the gravity that holds everything in place on it is no more or less real than faith and truth, and far, far less real than God. In looking at what we think reality is, it is more honest to say we are looking at the impacts of reality or its results. We cannot see the thing in itself because the thing in itself is not in our brain. Our perceptions and observations are nothing more than the results of whatever reality there is. But that being said, if there is a perception of observation of reality, there has to be a reality in some sense. If there is more than one reality, then we have a choice of what we think reality is. Obviously, most people pick the physical conception of reality. This is the model we think science and our physical senses confirm. Science has, over time, changed the idea of what we think physical reality looks like. The early Greeks and the modern scientist could not be further apart on how they see physical reality, though both believe reality is physically autonomous. The idea of a physical reality hardly does justice to the modern conception of reality. However, scientists are parsimonious. They will not tear down something without something better to put in its place. As of this writing, most scientists assume the physical reality hypothesis remains the best explanation for what we observe. But this can become just another exercise in confirmation bias. Scientists assume what they observe is best explained in terms of their perspective. But their perspective is only being compared to itself. If I see a tree, then the tree, one assumes, has to be there. If not as a tree, then as something that the brain reconstitutes as a tree. If what I see is not a tree, then there has to be an explanation for why I think I see a tree and why, so far as anyone can tell, all those who look at this same thing, see a tree. Why do we not all see different things? Or do we? Who can tell? It's difficult then, in looking at how science works, to see it as anything more than confirmation bias and circular reasoning. Naturally, there was no reason for primitive man to not think that the table he hit was not there. We still assume the table is there, but it is a far different thing than it used to be. In fact, it is getting harder and harder to see the table as anything than a mental construct, if we look at it from the perspective of a physicist. At most, the observer is being impacted by forces, but what is a force? A force has no existence except in its impact on other forces. We generally think of a bullet having force, but the force is the bullet. Nothing else exists so far as anyone can ascertain. But what is physical reality if everything physical is just composed of forces? Only when we try to alter a force in some way does the force exhibit resistance and thus becomes observable. Physical reality is real only in its contrasts. Thus, science can find facts but not truths when it observes the physical world. Facts are contingent statements making probabilistic claims about relative events. A synthetic statement makes a claim that can be confirmed only by an observation. But even simple statements such as saying it is raining have to be interpreted in light of how we define a condition of raining and the location we are at. There is no absolute state or condition of raining. It is always contingent on time and place and definition. As the reader may have noticed, only physical reality has been mentioned so far. But we are not discussing its nature, as physical reality cannot be known. It is observed by the senses, but in fact reality is incomprehensible. It could be considered brain activity if the brain was not part of a physical reality we cannot observe directly or substantiate independent of the brain. We might say reality is a production of the mind, but the mind is not physical and so technically cannot be used as an explanation for physical reality. No doubt most of you following this agree to a large degree to what has been said so far, but yet the implications of what was said are unlikely to be appreciated. If what is being said is true, then your truth is as good as everyone else's. What we end up with, if we follow the logic faithfully enough, is philosophical anarchy. Every idea being as good as every other idea. Whatever is in a person's mind is real. But this highlights the inherent absurdity of the idea of a physical reality. In looking for what is objectively real, we destroy all hope of objectivity. There is no basis for choosing what one person views as real over what someone else thinks is real. Even our brain exists only as a perception, and there is nothing physical about perception. So, how does that which is physical perceive the physical when the perception is non-physical? What we are doing here is following the logic based on the premise that physical reality is physically real. However, this exercise in logic is not the same as following the conditions created by a physical reality. Physical reality is not constructed out of logic, therefore, it ought not be constrained by logic or the laws of logic, but it is. If it is logical to suppose the world is physical, then the guiding principle of reality is logical, not physical. If we come to the conclusion the world and reality is physical, by logic, then logic is the substrate on which the physical exists. This is logically inconsistent, of course, and what we are doing is proving logically that reality is not truly physical. Physical reality is governed by physical forces. Even when we get to the level of human society, we find force predominates. He who carries the biggest stick and wields it best, rules the rest. But the fact remains that we operate in this physical reality on the basis of logic and information, not force. The use of force has to be guided by information nor force. Force needs something higher than itself, or it would do no work. But logic, in justifying physical reality, destroys the physical conception of reality. If we label the view that reality is physical as the one-world hypothesis, then logically this hypothesis ought to encompass all of our observations and ideas about reality. But it is impossible for that to happen on the grounds previously alluded to. Logic exists on a deeper and more comprehensive level than do our ideas about physical reality. We cannot logically include all factors within our ideas about physical reality because logic must exist external to physical reality to evaluate it. If we look at empirical science as science based on the assumption the world is physical and the only thing that exists is the forces of the physical world, the only thing science can look at is the relative interactions of physical forces. From the perspective of the one-world hypothesis, truth is relative, contingent, and probabilistic. There are no absolute or metaphysical truths. There are only synthetic statements based on a posteriori reasoning or induction. The mere fact we can say this means empirical reality is lacking something. When we look at physical reality and we note that physical reality rejects metaphysics, we are obviously looking at things from a higher plane of existence. This is meta-reality in the province of metaphysics. If reality was as empiricists think, there would be no empiricism. If reality was physical, there would be no truth. Reality devoid of truth would have no science or peer review. In a physical reality, truth would be relative and there would be no way for a group to establish which is the truer statement or claim. That being said, this is the situation in society. Truth in society is what the man with the biggest stick says it is. If you want a better truth, you need to have the physical means to force it upon others. Such is the case with the political truths of the left and the right. Physical conflict has been reimagined as a democratic election. But the essence of a physical conflict is still there, and it does not take much for a political disagreement to turn into a brawl. Relative truth requires administrator to decide what the truth will be. The need for administrators creates a need for a higher order mind, which in physical reality means an institution. The institutions is created from law and creates a kind of higher level physical reality. But laws, as is the case with so much that composes the one reality hypothesis, ORH, has nothing to do with physical reality and is in many ways, as said, the administrative sector is a parody of the reality it is supposed to represent. Laws are totally artificial and created by human beings. They do not even exist in the ORH because they are information, and while the symbols by which information is transmitted are real, they lack meaning without recourse to the metaphysical realm. Meaning is attached to symbols. The symbol does not have intrinsic meaning. So, the institution is created by laws that are artificial creations created by sentient beings. The law is actually nothing more than human opinion codified into law and regulated by an institution authorized to use physical force to ensure compliance. To make the ORH work, mankind has to resort to laws, and to make laws work, man must use physical force or the threat of it. But the justification for all of this is that the ORH contains all truth and possibilities within its boundaries. We may disagree with each other, there may be some people on the left and others on the right, but these positions are simply variations of all the possibilities contained in the ORH. This is why ORH people will always downplay differences and claim we are all one race, and we need to all get along. The idea that there is an unreconcilable difference between two races of peoples is alien to their way of thinking. But in fact, they create the conditions under which this unreconcilable division exists. When the ORH says it includes all ideas about reality in itself, it is a lie. If the ORH includes all ideas about reality, these ideas are only partial truths. The ORH cannot include all realities or ideas about reality because it attempts to be inclusive. If the ORH is inclusive, it must exclude that which rejects inclusivity. One can no more seek unity in diversity than seek truth in inclusivity. One is either non-discriminatory or logical, one cannot be both. So it is that one cannot include all realities and embrace a reality that is logical, moral, and deductive. Physical reality creates an ethical society because ethics is the rule of law. But the law is neither moral nor logical. Thus, there is a need for a different conception of reality that comprehends reality as logical. This logical version of reality must exist, or we could not judge the ORH as inadequate. The issue of logical necessity is also encapsulated in questions of why anything exists without the logical necessity of existence. A question that cannot be answered with reference to physical reality presupposes the question of why reality exists. If physical reality has a beginning, the beginning has to be grounded in a non-material realm, a realm the one reality hypothesis denies can exist. Physical reality is an inadequate explanation for its existence. Reality cannot be caused to come into existence because without physical existence there is no logical necessity for the cause to occur. The ORH is at the same time an inadequate explanation for itself and a categorical denial that anything other than physical reality can exist. The ORH both denies the possibility of anything other than physical reality and precludes the possibility of physical reality existing without a non-physical origination. In saying metaphysical reality is incoherent, the secularist only claims moral and logical truths are not compatible with the ORH. But we know this already, but the real question is there a model of reality that is not incompatible with its own premises? We know the ORH denies metaphysical statements, but it only does this by using metaphysics to make the claim. The ORH is incompatible with itself and its claims, which is why the two-reality hypothesis is the only possible solution. The two-reality hypothesis, TRH, accepts there are people who are materialists and who reject metaphysics as well as anything that cannot be observed by the senses. However, those who adhere to the TRH realize that the ORH is contradictory and self-refuting. We realize those who have adopted materialism are philosophically incoherent and technically insane. We choose to ignore them. TRH asserts there is a second reality composed of logical and moral truths. In fact, the TRH claim is that reality is created out of information. But to understand this conception of reality requires we understand the nature of information. It has been clearly shown the ORH rejects the analytical and logical. But all information is inherently analytical and necessarily logical. To have information requires sentience, and this is not attached to the human brain, though the physical folks will claim it is. No doubt they will spend a lifetime poking into gray matter to find the seat of the consciousness, but sentience is locked up in the complexities of communication. This requires a coder and decoder and a means of transmission. Language cannot convey the complexities and detail of information because it is self-referential, but we all understand communication well enough to grasp what is being said, regardless of the limitations of language. There is no information and no analytical reality without truth. Truth is not natural or automatic nor eternal in the sense of it not having a source and a beginning. Truth is not objective, it is synthetic in the sense that it is created by an originator. God decided what the truth is, and He made it logical so that it would make sense to us. He created us logical because, like the rest of creation, we too are logical. This is why the truth is in us. We could, if we wished, deduce the truth from the premise that God exists. Logic would guide our progress. But the truth is also in reality because reality is a logical construct created by God as truth. So, we can see the truth established by God in the created world. And of course, the truth is also in the Bible as the Word of God which Jesus manifested and lived out. This logical reality is coherent. We can deduce the truths of this reality from the axiom of God's existence. The most obvious truth about reality is that human beings do not own this world, it was created without our assistance. We can and do add value to it, but we have no legitimate claim to the value it as capital represents. This poses a problem for parasites who need to justify owning the earth so they can access its value. Parasites have nothing but what God provided. We see many cultures that live off of the earth without ever giving anything back. This is like living off the wealth your forefathers accumulated, without ever adding anything of your own to the accumulated capital. Parasites consume what God makes available, and when it is gone, they move to a pristine location and strip it bare of resources. Also, when this is done, they move again. Hopefully God will repair the damage they do before they return. The truth creates a better reality than the one formed by the rationalizations of parasites. The concept of a physical reality was not a random accident. People were not unaware of what they were doing. The key moment in the creation of the concept of a physical reality was in formulating the idea that might makes right and the end justifies the means. Eve believed that if one could, one should. Eve became a lawmaker and a lawgiver, a person who decided where good and evil lay and established rules to regulate it. She did what she felt was right in her own eyes. This was an emotion-based decision. Knowing good and evil, based on her feelings, she was no longer under her husband or God, and so she obtained to a new reality, one of her choosing in creation. But law is based on force or physicality, not on truth or logic and morality. To return to a life based on truth, we have to abandon the life based on the exercise of physical force mediated by law. We need to cease doing what we think is right because it is what we want to do. This constitutes a rebirth. We are reborn because we die to the physical world and its ethics. We are reborn in the spirit because this is a life based on information and truth. Spirit is partly an expression of the non-physical. The idea is to separate from the physical, to create what is ultimately a new life or reality lived in faith or trust, neither of which is physical. The life of a Christian is lived in a church governed by elders and deacons. The elders form a general council and the deacons the lower council. The general council area of interest relates to place, whereas deacons are concerned with the fruits of faith. These fruits are divided into 12 sectors. Lower councils are specific to the fruits of an occupational sector, whereas the general council deals with intersectoral issues. A priori consultants helps guide the process by securing the church from assault. Securitization eliminates the need for democracy, governments, and the legal machinery of legislature, courts, and to a large extent, the police. These are all attempts to secure the people, but in the end they let the wolf into the sheep pen. Churches must police their own jurisdictions. The church exists to conduct an experiment proving the Word of God is strong. The church is the test group and liberals are the control group. The control group continues to live as it chooses, embracing the one world hypothesis. The test group lives in faith as a church built on faith. Reality is logical, moral, and right. To understand truth, we must live in faith. In fear we lose faith. The bottom line is that reality does not make us, we make reality. We can live in fear and create a reality that is physical, or we live in faith and create a reality that is logical. There are no other options. Physical reality is the result of man living in fear. Our fear turns faith into flesh. Reality is as physically real as the level of fear we feel. Fear is an emotion, and fears lead us to a life controlled by our emotions. This teaching is incomprehensible to most people. But without faith we produce a reality based on or grounded in fear. Faith and fear exist in an inverse relationship. If we do not have faith, we become divorced from others as they represent a threat to us. The flesh will take on more form and definition because it is formed by emotion. To have faith we need to feel secure in our relationships with others. This means there has to be a way to secure our work from the compromises initiated by others. When we know people can steal or otherwise deprive us of what we have created, we fear them. Fear of others means we want barriers put between them and us. These barriers often consist of physical things, but the bigger problems are the mental barriers. Mental barriers do lead to physical ones. So, reality is either a product of faith or fear. If we live in faith, we live in the Spirit and we are open to one another. But if we are in fear, we will see others as a threat and will devise ways to distance ourselves from others. This distance is manifested as physical reality. This is the reality we are in. We either have faith and live in the Spirit, or we live in fear and others represent danger and a threat to us.